Base painted the tumbler white. Then I applied my different colors to the tumbler. Before I applied my decals, I sealed the different colors with a clear gloss spray. Then I used my Silhouette Cameo to cut the decals, and I applied them onto the cup using clear transfer tape that I got from a local vinyl supply store here. After I had the decals positioned where I wanted, I spray painted the tumbler black. I usually spray paint over my trash can. I use a flat black spray paint. Then I removed all the decals. After I let the matte spray paint dry all the way, then I removed the decals. After I've removed all the decals, I go ahead and seal with the clear matte sealer. And this is what it looks like after it's sealed with the sealer. Looks pretty good. I like it. I like the colors. It's really fun. Then I go ahead and epoxy my tumbler. Here I'm going to show how I mix the epoxy. I use East Coast resin epoxy, part A, which is the resin. It's the thicker part for me. I have that sitting on inside a coffee cup on top of a coffee warmer to keep the resin, the thicker portion, warmed up. It helps to reduce my bubbles and helps with mixing. Then I also measure out the part B, the hardener. I pour the warm portion in my cup first. It seems to mix better that way for me. Some people do it the opposite way. I make sure I get as much of it out as I possibly can. Then I'm going to also pour part B, which is the hardener for me, into my mixing cup. And then I'll go ahead and give it a stir. I mix or stir pretty fast. It's recommended to stir slow to reduce your bubbles, but I don't really have an issue with bubbles, I think, because I have my resin sitting on the coffee warmer. So I go ahead and mix it up right here. And then I'm going to show how it looks after I've mixed for a couple of minutes. Like a minute and a half. It's still really cloudy. I don't know why my camera wouldn't focus. So I go ahead and continue mixing until it starts to look clear. You can tell when you look in there if it's not mixed properly. It looks like you have little swirls of unmixed epoxy in there. So here it's mixed. It's pretty clear. You can see just a few little bubbles, which I'm not really concerned about. I use a transparent Casting Craft transparent blue resin dye, just a tiny drop. It's supposed to help reduce the yellowing. And I'll go ahead and mix that in, and then you can see the bubbles right there. Just not too bad. Then I'm going to go ahead and apply the epoxy. Looking in the video, I noticed you guys, my hand was in the way, so I turned y'all around. And I just pour the epoxy on there and smooth it with my finger. And I smooth it as much as I possibly can. And I make sure I get it all covered, and then I have a nice amount. And then I also make sure I get the bottom epoxied really good. After I get all the epoxy on there and make sure I have it all covered, I'm going to take a torch, which is what you see here, and I'm just going to wave it back and forth over my tumbler to pop any bubbles that may have come up. My leftover epoxy, I used a lot of epoxy. I don't know what I was thinking. Usually I have a lot less than this leftover. I go ahead and make molds with my leftover epoxy, which is what I'm doing here. And that glitter I was using was electric bubble gum from Backfist Customs. And these, I can use keychains or make straw toppers with them or however. And that's usually what I do with my leftover epoxy. Like I said, I don't usually have as much leftover, but I did. And this one. And I just have my molds and I just fill them up with any epoxy I have left over. That's the way I don't feel bad about wasting any epoxy. I'll show you guys the finished product as soon as it's done curing. After 2 coats of epoxy have dried, I'm going to take my X-Acto knife and clean up the rim of this tumbler. Holding it at a downward angle away from me, I'm going to remove any epoxy that has dried there on the lip of the tumbler. You can also use this deburring tool from Amazon, which is safer. I'm going to go around the rim of the tumbler and just get all of that epoxy inside and out. Here you can see a piece of epoxy has pulled in there. I take my X-Acto knife and I just kind of go underneath the edge and lift it, and it usually flicks off once it's dry. And again, I'm just going to go around and get all that epoxy off of there that has cured. Then I'm going to take acetone on a paper towel and I'm going to go around the inside of my tumbler. That's going to remove any paint residue or other sticky residue, tape, or anything that's been on the inside of my tumbler. I use 100% acetone from the paint section in Walmart. I'm also going to put a little acetone on a magic eraser and go around the inside of the tumbler, and that's going to remove anything else that the first little wipe didn't remove. Then I'm going to take a medium to fine sanding block and I'm just going to go around the rim, the lip of the tumbler, the body of the tumbler, and the base of the tumbler, and try to get it as nice and smooth as I can without scratching the paint, or if it's a glitter tumbler. Once I have that all done, this is what the tumbler is going to look like when it's all finished and ready for its final layer of epoxy. Here I'm going ahead and doing the final layer of epoxy on the tumbler. I did epoxy on the tumblers previously in this video, so I'm not going to go into too much detail, but I'm just going to spread it over, pour the epoxy on the tumbler and spread it with my fingers, making sure I cover it really good, make sure I get the top and the bottom, and make sure I pull the epoxy up to the lip of the tumbler so that that'll have a nice good seal. And I'm just doing that to both of them. This last layer of epoxy is going to smooth everything over and give it a nice good finish. After I get the epoxy smooth all over the tumbler, I'm going to take the torch and I'm going to go over the tumbler, and this is going to pop any bubbles that has come up on the tumbler. And I'm just going to wave it back and forth across both of the tumblers. Then I'm going to take the lint-free nail wipe and I'm going to spray it with alcohol. This is 91% alcohol in that spray bottle, and I'm going to hold that nail wipe along the rim or the lip of the tumbler, and that's going to clean up any epoxy that has dripped over there, and that's going to help me to where I don't have to do the cleanup with the X-Acto knife and run the risk of scratching the final finish on the tumbler. And I'm going to do that on both of them. I just make sure I get that rim or lip nice and clean. Again, I'm just smoothing. After I clean the rim with the alcohol wipe, I'm going to smooth the epoxy back up and make sure I get it all covered. And then I'm going to go back over it with the torch to pop any bubbles that may have come up when I was smoothing the epoxy. After the final layer of epoxy has completely dried, I'm going to go ahead and take an X-Acto knife and gently clean the rim of any epoxy that might have been left. There's not much left on there because if you remember previously, I used an alcohol wipe to remove the epoxy as the tumbler was turning. After I clean the rim, I'm going to take some acetone on a paper towel and I'm going to clean out the inside. On that one, you can kind of see where the tape from the pool noodle left marks in there, and I'm going to get those all out of there, and I'm going to make sure to remove any kind of residue, paint, markings, or whatever might be inside the tumbler. That one was pretty clean and it wasn't really that much to remove, but I just, double check and make sure. After I've done that, I'm going to take them over to the sink and I'm going to wash them with Dawn dish soap and a scrub sponge. I'm going to clean out the inside really well and the outside, remove any dust, fingerprints, loose glitter, smudges, whatever. The tops also get washed. After they're completely washed and rinsed, I go ahead and dry them. I usually use a rag or some kind of cloth, but I didn't have one beside me, so I was just using the paper towel here to get them nice and dry and pretty sparkly. After I've dried them, they're going to be all done and ready. So this is what they look like. This one has a lot of sparkle, so pretty. This one has just a little sparkle, still pretty. These are really fun to do, and this is the finished product of my peekaboo tumblers. I like them.